Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. So in today's video, in the spirit of March Madness, CNN has created a 2028 presidential bracket of the top 16 Republicans and Democrats running for president in the 2028 election. I thought it'd be fun to go down the bracket, go through the list, and do the first round, which is often called March Madness the Sweet 16, of who I think would advance to the next round. So the way I'm going to look at this is, let's say in a hypothetical scenario, we have one candidate versus another who I think, if they faced off head-to-head 1v1 in a presidential primary going across all the states, who I think would win of the two candidates. That's the way I'm going to be looking at it. Kind of like of the two, who I think is more likely to win in advance. So for starters, I'm going to start on the Republican side, as Donald Trump is the president. The Republicans technically are the incumbent party that are now in charge. I'm going to start with the Republicans, and I'm going to start up top where we have J.D. Vance at number 1 going up against Republican Senator of Missouri, Josh Hawley. Now this one, no offense to Josh Hawley, but you have two Republicans, one former senator, one now senator of Missouri. Both you can consider at one-time rising stars in the Republican Party. I think Vance versus Hawley, without a doubt, this is going to be J.D. Vance winning and advancing to round 2. Not really too much of a doubt on that one. So J.D. Vance advances after beating Josh Hawley. Now we get into a very interesting one, Nikki Haley versus Ted Cruz. And it's fascinating because in this matchup, you have two very different wings of the Republican Party. Ted Cruz, once upon a time in 2016, was the number 1 challenger to Donald Trump in the 2016 Republican primary. Ted Cruz was seen by many in the Republican Party as the party's best chance at stopping Donald Trump. And obviously Trump and Cruz got into it a lot during the campaign, said a lot of nasty things at each other. Trump probably more than Cruz. But obviously they worked it out. They have become very close allies in Washington, and all that beef has sort of been squashed. So now in a Nikki Haley versus Ted Cruz matchup, you're looking at Nikki Haley represents the more George W. Bush wing of the party, and Ted Cruz, I think you could argue, sort of represents a mix of the Trump wing and the Bush wing. Cruz, for a while, was seen as one of the most conservative Republicans in the Republican Party, very pro-Constitution, by the book. Nikki Haley, we saw run against Trump. She's definitely been aligned now with the more anti-Trump wing of the Republican Party, even though she did endorse him in the 2028 Republican primary after she dropped out. She certainly still would be remembered for being more of the anti-Trump wing of the party. So in a Nikki Haley-Ted Cruz Republican primary matchup, I think you're looking at a lot of the southern states voting for Ted Cruz, a lot of the New England and Western Coast states voting for Nikki Haley, and then the Rust Belt, I think, is probably where the primary would be decided. And I think in that scenario, I actually would have Ted Cruz nearly beating Nikki Haley and advancing to the next round, facing off against J.D. Vance. Nikki Haley versus Ted Cruz would be a very, very interesting one, as you would have the two number 2 finishers in 2016 and 2024 in the Republican primaries facing off against each other. So that is very, very fascinating. Next matchup, we have Marco Rubio going up against Tom Cotton. Marco Rubio, longtime Florida senator since 2010, now the Secretary of State for President Trump's administration. He is someone that I said would be strongly probably in considering to be the next Republican nominee for president in 2028, if not J.D. Vance. And if Vance were to run and win, maybe Rubio would be in consideration for VP. I think Rubio is one of the stronger Republicans in the Republican Party when it comes to having a chance at winning a presidential election. Tom Cotton is someone who's the Arkansas senator. He is someone I said has long been a consideration, I think, for probably running for president, but not being able to get too much attraction, but getting enough to be in consideration to be like vice president or secretary of state or something in that nature. So I think Rubio versus Cotton, I would say, starts off as Rubio favored to win that matchup. Cotton, I think, would be a potential choice for a cabinet position or VP, but as president, I don't think Cotton has enough nationwide name ID, to really be able to win a presidential election in a Republican primary. Number 4, we have Sarah Huckabee Sanders versus Tim Scott. This is an interesting one because this, you could say, are two Republican rising stars in the party. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, just elected governor of Arkansas, I believe in 2022. Obviously, she was President Trump's second press secretary and the daughter of former Governor Mike Huckabee. She is always brought up when it comes to talking about 2028, especially 2028 vice presidents. But I could see her potentially run in 2028, if not 2032, as president. But she's always in consideration for a vice president in 2028 as well. Going up against Tim Scott, who I think would very similarly also, he ran for president briefly in 2024. He's probably going to do so again in 2028. He would also, I think, be a good choice for vice president. When it comes to the matchup of who would win a Republican primary, I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders would do a better job at being able to excite Republican voters and keep the Make America Great Again wing of the party moving, which Huckabee Sanders was a part of in the first Trump term administration. So I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders would defeat Tim Scott and move on in the bracket to face off against Marco Rubio. Next, we have, honestly, as fun as Donald Trump versus Ron DeSantis was, Donald Trump Jr. versus Ron DeSantis may even be more entertaining. If this matchup ever happened, this would be the most fiery matchup ever imaginable. Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump both went very hard at each other in 2024, and Donald Trump Jr., who many have considered to be even more hot-headed and more, I would say, vulgar in the media than Donald Trump, going up against Ron DeSantis would be an absolute bloodbath of a matchup. And honestly, looking at this one, this may sound crazy because Ron DeSantis has a proven track record of Florida at governing like a great Republican governor in the eyes of many Republicans. But we did also just see Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis go at it in a presidential primary, and Donald Trump won big. DeSantis' approval ratings nationally quickly fell behind, and I wonder if DeSantis versus Trump Jr. would be something similar, because I think Ron DeSantis would have more policy and such to run on in a Republican primary, but Donald Trump Jr. has Donald Trump's name. And as a Republican Party that is a Trump party now, this is the party of Donald Trump, I actually did not think I was going to do this. I am putting Trump Jr. above Ron DeSantis. There's always an upset or two in March Madness, and I think in a DeSantis versus Trump Jr. matchup, Trump Jr. advancing over DeSantis would be one of the biggest upsets, and one that I actually think makes a lot of sense, as the party is the party of Donald Trump. I could conceivably see this happening. Would it be a smart move for a general election, having Trump Jr. over DeSantis? Probably not. But in a Republican primary with many people loyal to the president turning out to vote, I could definitely see this being a potential scenario. Now we have Brian Kemp, the governor of Georgia, and representative, or now I guess United Nations ambassador Elise Stefanik, facing off against Brian Kemp. And this is going to be an interesting one because this is one where Elise Stefanik, again, is a rising star in the Republican Party. She's obviously in President Trump's administration. Brian Kemp has gotten the ire of President Trump many times, though they seem to have made up during the 2024 election, and Kemp helped President Trump win the state of Georgia. This is one where I think, unlike Ron DeSantis, who DeSantis is going up against Trump Jr., Donald Trump would come out all in favor of his son and against DeSantis. Kemp would not have this problem in all likelihood, and I think Kemp was the stronger candidate as governor of Georgia. I think Kemp would defeat Stefanik and move on in this matchup, setting up another fun matchup of Brian Kemp versus Donald Trump Jr. That was one that would be very fun to see in the Republican primary. But Elise Stefanik, again, I think is a very good Republican rising star, someone to watch for as VP or in 2032, but for 2028, I think Brian Kemp would advance on this one. Number 7, we have Greg Abbott versus Kristi Noem. This is a very interesting one where we have the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. He's been around, I believe this is his 3rd or 4th term in office now. Texas is one of the largest states in the country, both in population, size, and in GDP. Kristi Noem, former governor of South Dakota, she had the scandal break I think it was last year or a few years ago now. I think it essentially took any national chance of her winning a presidential election out of it. So I think Greg Abbott would beat Kristi Noem. I'm sure she would still probably try and run at some point, but I do believe that Greg Abbott would certainly defeat Kristi Noem in this matchup. Number 2, we have Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin and former North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. Burgum now working in the Trump administration. No offense to Doug Burgum, but this one feels like a no-brainer. Glenn Youngkin would win and move on in advance here. Youngkin won the state of Virginia, at best, you could call it Democratic-leaning battleground state for the Republicans at best. Probably you could call it a likely Democratic state. Youngkin was able to win it in 2021. That was a very big win for the Republicans, and Youngkin's national profile skyrocketed after that. So for the Republicans advancing, we have Glenn Youngkin versus Greg Abbott, Brian Kemp versus Donald Trump Jr., and Sarah Huckabee Sanders versus Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz versus J.D. Vance. That's the Republicans advancing to the next rounds of the bracket. We're going to do that in a separate video, but first we have to go on to the Democratic side of things, where we're going to have the matchup of the 2024 ticket, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, facing off against each other in a hypothetical 2028 Democratic primary. Whoever seeded the bracket this way obviously had a lot of fun doing this. Kamala Harris, Tim Walz. Tim Walz, I believe, recently was even saying that he felt that him and Harris lost because they weren't aggressive enough at going after and saying what they really believe and such. So this could be a matchup that would actually potentially get kind of nasty, but all the early primary polling does still show Harris leading, and Walz obviously had a lot of gaffes in his vice presidential debate against J.D. Vance. I have no doubt, I think both of them will probably run for president in 2028, but I am taking Kamala Harris to beat Tim Walz in this matchup and advance to the next round, and I really don't think that's too much of a surprise. The next matchup of number 8 versus number 9 is very interesting. We have Representative from New York, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, facing off against newly Democratic Senator of Arizona, Ruben Gallego. And this is one where I think it's all about name ID in a primary. As much as the Republican primary could be open-ended, the Democratic Party is really, really open-ended. And this is going to be a case of name ID versus no name ID. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, whether Democratic voters like her or don't like her, they know who she is. Ruben Gallego of Arizona, I would be shocked if more than 20% of the party has heard of him, and it'd probably only be because he beat Kari Lake that they know who he is. AOC has been viewed for a while now as one of the younger rising stars in the Democratic Party, and I think in this matchup, AOC would go on and beat Gallego, advancing to the next round. Facing off against Kamala Harris, that would be a very interesting matchup, as the Democratic Party is still searching for an identity after Donald Trump beating them in 2024. Harris versus AOC would be a very, very fun matchup to see, and we're going to get that in the next round. Number 5, we have Wes Moore, the governor of Maryland, who did say not too long ago that he doesn't have any plans to run in 2028, but you know how things work with politicians. They can say one thing, and then a year later they can say, okay, well, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm going to run for president. The time is right. So they list Wes Moore as a candidate. He said he won't run, but will he? All bets are off. We'll have to see. Going up against number 12, the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. This is one that I think is honestly a fascinating matchup, because I think Wes Moore and Andy Beshear both would be very effective general election candidates. And unfortunately, in the situation with the bridge in Baltimore, Wes Moore had to be in the national spotlight for a while, and an unfortunate, tragic event. But Wes Moore showed off his leadership skills and prowess during those situations, and was nationally praised for his job that he did. And of that terrible situation, showed Wes Moore could be a strong national force if he ever ran for president. Andy Beshear is a Democratic governor in the Republican state of Kentucky. That alone is very impressive in its own right. The question would be, in this Democratic primary, which one of Wes Moore and Andy Beshear would be able to turn out more voters for their side. I think this could actually be one of the more underrated Democratic primary matchups of Wes Moore versus Andy Beshear. But I do think the two of them going at it, I think Wes Moore would win and advance to the next round. I think the Democrats in 2028 could be potentially hoping for a Barack Obama type situation in 2008, where they were looking for someone to kind of come out of nowhere and re-energize the party and get a lot of people excited to turn out to vote for them. And I think Wes Moore would be potentially that candidate that could do so. Number 4, we have Gavin Newsom, governor of California, and ESPN host Stephen A. Smith. I love that this is even a matchup, because Newsom and Smith are both doing something actually kind of similar right now. Gavin Newsom recently started a podcast where he's been having a lot of guests on and talking about America, the Democratic Party, what they need to do. And Stephen A. Smith, for weeks now, has been on his own channel and on a YouTube channel, I believe, doing something very similar. He's been talking about what the Democratic Party did wrong in 2024, which allowed Donald Trump to win, and what direction the Democratic Party needs to go in. So Newsom versus Stephen A. Smith, as crazy as this is, honestly would be a very fascinating conversation, because it really would get into what the Democratic Party needs to do. And I think this one would probably be very fascinating. I have no idea what Stephen A. Smith campaigning would even be like, but Newsom versus Smith would be a lot of fun. But I do think Gavin Newsom, he's the more recognizable name in the Democratic Party. Nationwide, you'd probably say Stephen A. Smith is, but I think Gavin Newsom would probably win and take out Stephen A. Smith in the first round of the bracket. But this is certainly a fascinating matchup that I'd be very, very interested in seeing how that would play out. Number 6, we have Governor of Michigan Gretchen Whitmer going up against, I believe, former Barack Obama administration member Rahm Emanuel. And this is an interesting one. Gretchen Whitmer, Governor of Michigan, obviously one of the most important swing states in the country. Donald Trump won it in 2024, a big part of him winning back the White House. Democrats, if they're going to win the next election, they almost certainly need to win the state of Michigan. And Whitmer, being from the state, being the governor of the state, is very smart strategically. Rahm Emanuel, the only thing I can really say about him that I know is that he was involved in the Obama administration, and that would give him some legs in the Democratic primary, but I think this is a candidate that not many people have heard of in the Democratic Party, and I think in Whitmer versus Emanuel in that matchup, I would be shocked if Whitmer did not win that one. I do think she's one of the stronger candidates in 2028 that gives the Democrats a chance of winning, and I can't imagine her losing to Emanuel in the first round. Next, we have Pete Buttigieg going up against Cory Booker. This is interesting because Buttigieg obviously served in the Biden administration, ran for president in 2020, and actually did very well before dropping out and endorsing Joe Biden, where I believe it was Super Tuesday. A lot of Democrats like Buttigieg, Klobuchar both dropped out and kind of cleared the way for the establishment Democrat to go to Biden. And I think Buttigieg in 2028, by signaling he's not going to run for Senate in Michigan, he's going to run for president in 2028. He, I think, starts out as one of the favorites right now to win the Democratic primary in 2028 regardless. Often in a lot of the early polls, he's polling either in second or third behind Harris, getting around 10%. So I think he starts out as the favorite. Cory Booker ran for president in 2020. I don't believe he did too well. I don't think he might have dropped out either before or right after Iowa and New Hampshire. So I don't think Booker would really have too much of a chance. In 2028, Buttigieg, I think, is more well known. He's probably a better campaigner, a better debater. I think Buttigieg would win this matchup in advance. Number 7, we have J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, versus 10 senator of Pennsylvania, John Fetterman. This one is interesting because these, I think, are two very, very different Democrats. J.B. Pritzker is someone who has been everything Donald Trump says. He's been hammering, he's been attacking. He does not want to give anything to Trump at all. Whereas Fetterman at times have voted with the Republicans on some things in the Trump agenda, wanting to work with Republicans to get things done in Washington. It's a big clash of the old Democratic Party and the resist Trump Democratic Party. And this matchup would be fascinating. Typically in primaries, the more hardcore members of the party turn out to vote. So it's more likely than not a moderate type candidate would lose and a more hardline candidate would win. We saw this obviously with Trump in 2016. We saw Bernie Sanders doing very well in 2016 and 2020. But it is possible for the moderate candidate to win, which is funny because Fetterman ran like very far left as a far left candidate the first time he ran for office, and now he's kind of been working with the Trump candidates and Republicans more. So it's a very interesting situation here. It also cannot be without mentioning J.B. Pritzker, his family is very, very wealthy. He's almost like an unlimited supply of money to spend in a Democratic primary campaign. That alone, I think, would give Pritzker a narrow edge, having the self-fundraising numbers to do so. Last matchup, we have Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, versus former Biden administration member and former Governor of Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo. This one, I think, is pretty clear-cut. I've been saying since, honestly, Vice President Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro. In hindsight, I can say this because it's pretty obvious, but I thought at the time it was a mistake. I thought Josh Shapiro was the best candidate for Kamala Harris to choose as VP. I think he gives the Democrats the best chance at winning the state of Pennsylvania and probably winning the presidency in 2028. I think he would be probably the best speaker, the best campaigner, and he would be someone that I think could re-energize the Democratic Party and at the same time be able to win over a lot of the independents that went to Donald Trump in 2024. I think Shapiro wins this matchup. Will the Democrats actually nominate Shapiro in 2028? That remains to be seen. He's probably going to be facing off against Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg. that primary, if that is going to happen, is going to be an absolute bloodbath. So that'd be very fascinating to watch. But I still will stand on the hill that Josh Shapiro is one of the strongest Democratic candidates in a general election to win in 2024 and in 2028. And will it happen? We'll see, but that's where things stand. Going on to the next round of the Democrats, we have Josh Shapiro facing up against J.B. Pritzker. Pete Buttigieg will be facing off against Gretchen Whitmer. That's going to be a very fascinating one. Two people who are now from the state of Michigan. Buttigieg moved to Michigan, so now both of them are from Michigan. That'll be interesting. Gavin Newsom going up against Wes Moore, and AOC facing off against Kamala Harris. Honestly, all of the Democratic matchups are very fascinating and could conceivably be very competitive in all of them. That's where things are right now after the end of the Sweet 16 in the first round. We have narrowed it down to 2, 4, 6, 8, 8 Republicans and 8 Democrats remaining going on to the next round. I'm going to pause the video here. I'm going to do the video in 3 parts. So this is the end of the Sweet 16. The next video will be going over these matchups and leading to the 4 remaining matchups. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to give it a like. Please remember to click subscribe. Leave a comment below. Obviously, brackets are all about who you think are going to win, who I think are going to win. So I want to hear your thoughts on these matchups. Who do you think would win? Is there a candidate that I had winning you agree with? Or is there a candidate I have losing that you think I'm wrong and you think they would win? I'm more than happy to hear it. Obviously, brackets are fun, so it really can go any way you want. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. Please remember to also subscribe to my channel and make sure you don't miss. I post a new video at least every single day, so you're not going to want to miss those. Thank you so much for watching and hope to see you in a future video.